We can't change people in this life, but we can emotionally influence them by how we show up.
Oh, yeah.
We can emotionally influence them by how we show up. So working on our listening skills, not cutting people off when they're speaking, especially when we hear things we don't agree with.
Welcome to the True Man Podcast. Let's face it, in the world today, it just feels complex. And I'll be honest, I kind of think that's a shame. But even more difficult these days, how do you handle yourself in the workplace, which is a whole other set of complexity? By that, I mean, as men, and I'm talking to the men in my audience, do you compliment women on their hair or their attire? Do you open the door for a woman, or has this become taboo? I was in a meeting with a colleague and met today's guest, and I thought to myself, man, we need to talk about this. Welcome to the True Man Podcast, Taryn Abrahams. Taryn is the founder and corporate behavioral specialist with Empower Behavioral Services. She's a behavioral and human interaction expert that helps companies implement behavioral best practices to improve relationships in the workplace. Man, that is a mouthful, Taryn. Taryn, welcome to the True Man Podcast.
Thank you so much, Mike. It's a real pleasure to be here. Thank you for inviting me.
Absolutely. You know, I think this is going to be a lot of fun. And in my view, it's really interesting subject matter. So before we dive into that, tell us a little bit about yourself and how you found yourself studying all this human behavior in order to help people improve.
So my career journey has been quite interesting. I started off, if you notice, there's some letters at the end of my name, MFT. I was a marriage and family therapist for many years. I had a private practice in Philadelphia, and I focused on helping families, couples, individuals improve their life and address issues, depression, anxiety, relationship issues. And I just, I've always had a passion for helping people, and I truly enjoyed that work. But it was very emotional work, and I decided to sort of move on with my career to see how I can leverage all of this experience that I have as a therapist. Fast forward those 12 years, I found myself working in for some very large medical device companies as in business development and sales. And you must be thinking, wow, how the heck did you get there? But I always knew I was good with people. At the time, my daughter was 1, and I was looking for an opportunity to just leverage my interpersonal skills and try something different. And so that's how I ended up in sales. I did that for about 10 years. Fast forward that, then we sort of find ourselves at 2017, which is the Me Too movement. And I, when that movement blew up, I really saw a need in the work environment to provide better training and create safe space for better or different conversations around the conversation of harassment. And as much as I thought the Me Too movement was powerful for victims, and let's be real, 85% of victims of harassment in the work environment are women.
Yeah.
As much as it was a positive movement for women, it created a lot of murky water for men. Like you said, can I compliment a woman on her attire? Can I be alone with a woman in a conference room and feel safe doing that? And at the time, we had Mike Pence as our vice president, who boldly said, oh, I don't meet with a woman alone in a room unless my attorney is there. So there was a strong message sent to people in the workplace.
Yeah, it makes sense, but that in and of itself.
Listen, and I understood it, right? I understood it. There was a tremendous amount of fear. That was created, and I've always said fear is like a cancer in an organization.
Yeah, Taryn, I have a piggyback on that. I didn't mean to interrupt you, but when our kids were growing up, and they're a little older now. My daughter's going to be 18 here shortly, and my son's 20. But when we used to have babysitters, I mean, they were always female. And I always told my wife, and there was a piece of me that felt bad about this, but there was a piece of me that was like, man, I always told my wife at the end of the night, I'm going to need you to take the babysitter home. I don't even want to be in the same car
Yeah.
and it's not that I didn't trust them. It's not that I didn't like them.
Sure.
I always had my wife do it because, I mean, you hear these stories and I didn't want somebody to like,
Come
you
back
know,
and accuse you of
fire.
something that didn't
Yeah.
happen. Right.
Right. And so I always had my wife do that. So the minute you
Yeah.
said that about, Mike Pence saying that, that's the first thing that crossed into my mind because I didn't want to put myself in an awkward position. Not that I thought I would. It's just, we're living in different times.
We are, but I always say through disruption comes opportunity,
Mm-hmm.
through disruption comes innovation. So I think that having these hard conversations about mistrust and fear is only going to help us move forward with this. And, when you talk about the example with your babysitter in our personal life, certainly make those decisions that, those sort of gut visceral reactions of, ooh, this may not feel right. You know what, honey, why don't you take her home? But in the workplace, we don't necessarily have that luxury. We have to work with our colleagues. We have to work with our leaders. When there's fear, it can lead to disengagement, distrust, weak cultures, turnover, and so forth and so on.
Yeah.
So I really saw a need in the work environment to help companies have different conversations around harassment. And for anyone that's listening on this podcast who's part of an organization or company, most of us have experienced where we've received a link in our email. Hey, click on this link and, check a box, help us check the box, participate in this online training around harassment. And by the way, when I worked in corporate America, after I was a psychotherapist, I too was that end user. I'd get that email with the link, click the link. And quite frankly, and I'm going to be really frank, I would click on the link, let the video play out, go do laundry because I worked out of my home, or go make lunch. And then when the quiz popped back up, I mean, really, if anyone with a half a brain could answer those questions. But really, was anybody walking away with a light bulb moment? Was anybody walking away with any sort of self-reflection? No.
When
And
you were
yet,
saying that, I was thinking, does anybody take those things serious?
no, they don't. For anyone that's listening who's an employer, it's good for people to hear that, because when you don't make an investment in something as important as anti-harassment training, and you just sort of fluff it over with a check a box pre-recorded link, it sends a message like, just do this and let's just get this.
We're
Let's
just
just get
checking
this
that
over
box
with.
off.
And
Yeah.
it's a real missed opportunity. It's a real missed opportunity. And even companies that, companies are probably, if they listen to this podcast, are thinking, well, we don't have those problems. I always say, just because people are not complaining doesn't mean there isn't a problem. The problem could be maybe they don't know who to go to. Maybe they don't have a good relationship with their HR professional. Maybe there's fear. And just because there's no reporting doesn't mean there isn't a problem. In fact, you put more than 10 people in a room, even less than 10 people, there's going to be conflict. There's going to be differences. We're all going to come with different boundaries, different comfort levels. So if you have people on your team, there's a good chance that there have been those missteps, right?
Yeah.
Not going to label it as all harassment, because majority of claims tend to be, it's not necessarily harassment, but it's creating an uncomfortable environment, which is a learning moment, which is a learning opportunity. And that's where companies should be investing in training and having those hard conversations. So really my business really I created my business in 2017. It was very much in reaction to the Me Too movement. Yes, it was to support victims, but mostly was to create a safe space for especially men to talk about, can I say this, my colleague looks nice in that new suit, right? And so going back to your original question, is it okay to say that? Absolutely it is. However, and a caveat to that, there's a fine line between a compliment and insinuating something different. So for instance, Jane, I really like that suit. You look wonderful in that. That's a great appropriate comment. As opposed to, Jane, I really like that suit. It really accentuates your curves. All right. Or if I can say this, it makes your ass look nice. Right. So we have to be very careful of the words that we use. we also have to recognize the impact that our words may have, not what are our intentions, because our intentions are usually good, but people don't care about our intentions. They care about how we leave them feeling. So when you pay a compliment to someone, you should be observing their reaction and using their body language as a guide. If it felt weird and they didn't receive it well, or maybe they were looking at you at one moment and then they started to look away, they're communicating to you. And that might mean that they're not comfortable. Or how about asking, are you comfortable with these compliments?
Yeah.
Are you okay with it? And by the way, when we ask those questions, we need to prepare ourselves for the truth. And that might sound like, with all due respect, I know you mean well, but I would appreciate it if you wouldn't comment on my attire, and just walk away and leave it at that. And I think, where most of my work comes in is really helping people to be a little bit more honest with each other and not be so quick to run to HR, but set those boundaries and speak our truth and learn from each other. That's all. That's how we're going to overcome this, is by learning from each other. And we only will learn if we're honest and we understand where they're coming from. We may not agree,
yeah,
but at least we know.
yeah.
Right?
And so, my wife, who's head of HR for a company, boy, oh boy, the stories I could tell.
Oh, I'm sure.
None of which I can tell on this podcast.
Yeah.
But yeah, she doesn't want you running to HR either, for a wide range of reasons, because usually by the time it lands on her desk, there's a problem. There's a problem, especially at her level, because it's worked its way up. So I guess the question is, how can we better communicate? How can we have these discussions without feeling, I don't know, embarrassed, or, because they really are pretty direct conversations. But if you have them up front, you can just really move on from anything feeling funny, but it doesn't feel like we want to have these conversations in the first place.
Well, they're uncomfortable. They certainly are, right? But I think that's only when we learn from each other. And so how do we do that? Well, what we're talking about now is not triggering or waking up the ego, right? We all have an ego, right? And when we feel attacked, when we feel criticized, when we're put in our place, our ego gets awakened, right? And none of us like to be in that position. So I think the first step is to recognize that this is maybe not going to be an easy conversation, that you might hear things that you may not agree with or may not like. But the other flip side to that is, but I'm going to make a conscious choice to be open-minded to what I'm going to hear. Because if I don't, they're still going to feel that way. And I'm going to continually make the wrong decisions or create or make, or just do what I call the missteps, right? I'm going to say things or do things that I mean well by, but I'm having the wrong impact on the other person. So I think it's a personal choice, the first step, to be open to hearing the feedback and expect that you're going to hear things that you are not going to agree with, right? Expect it, right? And it's not about being okay with it. It's not about agreeing with it, but how can I learn from this person and figure out the right rules of engagement for this relationship so that I'm having the right impact. And listen, I'm not going to say this is easy. This is not easy. I mean, so many companies hire me to help them with this, help us have hard conversations, help us be able to set better boundaries, help us address conflict in a way that's productive. Because by the way, if you look at our personal life, for example, put aside work, many of us are in relationships. You're married, you have a partner, you have a spouse, you have a girlfriend, boyfriend, so forth and so on. How many of us have had arguments with our partner and it was awful in the moment, but with the right approach, it actually brought resolution, it brought a deeper level of closeness, and it actually brought you even closer together as a couple, right? And so conflict, hard conversations, we can look at it as something that's going to go awfully bad, or we can look at it as an opportunity for learning and building our relationship together. It's those hard conversations that builds respect, that builds closeness, that builds trust, right? So if we're not having those conversations, we're missing a huge opportunity.
Well, you bring up something that I think is really important because, you brought up personal life. And what I found is that,
Yeah.
Because I don't separate really my business life and my personal life. It really all kind of bleeds over. Now, in my case, that's really cool. But what I found is that people separate. They kind of put things in categories. Well, I'm different in my business life than I am in my personal life. And my guess is that's not necessarily true because, when we're talking about relationships, it's really a lot of the same thing. So if you're having a hard time communicating, with people at work, are you having a hard time communicating with your spouse? Is your relationship the best? So I think the concepts really are a lot the same. They're much closer than they are far apart. Because if you don't have good relationships, you're not going to have great business. If you don't have good relationships, your marriage is going to suck. And so, I think there's a lot of synergy in that.
I agree with you. In fact, I cannot tell you how often I do a lot of coaching. So for the audience, I create training programs to improve business culture, whether it's addressing harassment issues, weak cultures, high turnover, weak leadership, retention issues. And I also do professional coaching. And I would say the majority of the people I work with on a one-on-one basis, they have fires burning in their personal life.
Yeah. Right? There's a name attached to it.
And the original reason they were referred to me is they're flying off the handle at work.
Yeah.
They're repeatedly late and missing deadlines, abrasive leadership, right? And then I find out they're going through a divorce.
Yeah.
Or one of their kids is in rehab, right? And so, yeah, absolutely. Our personal life very much affects our professional life. And that's why self-care is important. Wellness is important. The most important type of leadership is self-leadership. It's knowing when to pivot. It's knowing when to bow out. It's knowing when to apologize. It's knowing when to look in the mirror, and that becomes really important. And I can tell you, just from my perspective, as somebody that plays in the HR space, people's morale is really low right now. Burnout is very high.
Yeah.
Workplace fatigue, very high. I get calls on the daily from companies complaining about, the worst kind of employee is the one that shows up and is disengaged.
Yeah.
They're just going through the motions of their day. They're not bringing their A game. And, people have a lot of times asked me, where does burnout come from? I think burnout is at an all-time high right now. We've been through some very big global events. The pandemic, huge. Some of us lost loved ones. Some of us had to change careers. A lot of disruption came out of the pandemic, right? But burnout doesn't always come from the workload. Burnout comes from our inability to disconnect from the workload. And the more stressed we are, depending on your personality, the harder we might try to work, or the less ability we have to disconnect from our work. We're checking our phone at ungodly hours of the night.
Yeah.
And trying to make it work, right? And we're running and running and running, and we're not really stopping to reflect and self-lead. So I do a lot of leadership training and coaching, but self-leadership is the most important kind of leadership.
Well, it's funny when you were talking about, I was thinking about that earlier when you were talking about, the training you do with people, because for the most part, really, it's like anything. I mean, 90% of the people that show up for work are not going to be the type of people that harass somebody, but it's that small number that you're really coaching to. So really, before we put those quizzes out there for everybody that they don't really do in the first place.
Yeah.
I mean, isn't it about being more interpersonal and growing the self before we ever get to the point where we talk about these harassment situations?
Well, self-awareness is a huge part to any type of growth in our lives,
Yeah.
whether you're a leader, whether you're an employee, whether you're a husband, whether you're a business owner, self-awareness, what we're talking about really is emotional intelligence,
Yeah.
which, emotional intelligence is, if many researchers, there's been a lot of studies on this. Emotional intelligence is more valuable than IQ. Your IQ, you're born with. That's a fixed number. The IQ you had when you were an infant is the same that you have now. Although some people argue if you play brain games on your phone, you get smarter. But for the most part, we are who we are, right?
Yeah.
But emotional intelligence is being able to connect with people, being able to understand people, being able to self-lead, being able to say, you know what? I had really good intentions, but the way I spoke to the other day, I'm sorry if I had the wrong impact. It's being able to reflect on those situations and show our integrity to others. That's our emotional intelligence. And the good news is, unlike IQ, which really doesn't change, emotional intelligence can be built and improved with motivation, internal motivation. So we learn the most in this life through our relationships. It's not in a silo being alone. We learn through relationships. So if you're showing up at work and people for some reason end up yelling at you, or they're not listening to you, it could be an indication you're not listening to them, which goes back to self-awareness, which goes back to emotional intelligence. We can't change people in this life, but we can emotionally influence them by how we show up.
Oh, yeah.
We can emotionally influence them by how we show up. So working on our listening skills, not cutting people off when they're speaking, especially when we hear things we don't agree with. Don't cut people off, because when it comes time to you speaking, they'll be more open to listening to you, right? So a lot of this goes back to self-awareness, emotional intelligence, which is more valuable than IQ. In fact, I'll even take it a step further. I think the higher the IQ, the harder it is for that individual to have higher emotional intelligence. The smarter someone is, the more blind spots they have in terms of their interpersonal skills, in terms of their ability to connect with other people. Because they're so smart, they see through things, right? And
Yeah.
I think emotional intelligence, again, is more valuable, especially in the workplace, especially in our marriages and our relationships, than IQ. It's not the smartest person in the room. It's the person in the room that understands themselves and can navigate relationships effectively. That's business. That's effective business.
Yeah.
That's an effective life. It's not your IQ. It's your EQ, your emotional quotient or emotional intelligence.
So how can we help men listening to this podcast, or the women? I mean, I know I have women listeners. And at the end of the day, men and women are much closer aligned than we probably think on these issues. But how can we help them have the emotional intelligence to not just maneuver around in the workplace, but increase the level of their relationships?
Well, okay, so that's a great question, and I'll ask the audience: Do you and of course they're not able to respond, but some things to ask yourself is: Are you open to apologizing? Are you open to acknowledging when maybe you've had a misstep? If you're someone that never apologizes, there's a really good chance that you are having the wrong impact on others, and you are not acting emotionally as intelligent as you could. An apology doesn't necessarily mean you did anything wrong, right? Like tonight, I go home. I sleep next to my boyfriend. In the middle of the night, he elbows me in the face without knowing it, right? And I wake up the next morning, babe, you hit me in the face in the middle of the night. And his response is, well, I didn't mean it. Doesn't mean he didn't cause harm, though. He didn't mean it, but he still caused harm. So an apology doesn't necessarily mean you did anything wrong. But if the impact was negative to the other person, you have an opportunity to make it right. And those moments where we acknowledge we could have done something different, or maybe we could have said it in a different way, or maybe we could have had a different impact, again, is what creates more trust, creates more respect. And you talk about having those hard conversations. You need trust and respect to do it. You need the trust and respect in order to have those hard conversations, or else they're going to be very uncomfortable and perhaps even unsafe. So practice on becoming more self-aware. One great way to do that is develop a somatic vocabulary. So what do I mean by that? So people that are highly emotional intelligent make time to reflect on how they're feeling. Some of us are better at that than others. So like, for instance, at the end of a workday, why do I have a tight neck? Why do I have a headache? Why does my stomach feel like it's upside down? Connect those feelings that your body has with an emotion, because the emotions are tied to how our body responds. If you can learn to connect those dots, that builds self-awareness, which is one of the 5 pillars of emotional intelligence. It's emotional, it's self-awareness, self-regulation, motivation, empathy, and social skills. Those are the 5 pillars of emotional intelligence. Self-awareness is at the top. So the more you become self-aware, the more you can connect those dots, the better self-awareness you have, and the more you can better navigate others. You can't understand other people if you don't understand yourself.
I'm a big fan of journaling, and this is where I tell people
Journaling is amazing.
Journal a
Journaling
lot.
is amazing. Yep.
If you can get that kind of information down on paper,
Yeah.
you're collecting data on yourself, which I know sounds really kind of goofy, but that data that you begin to gather about yourself is really going to come back in spades, because
It's true.
at least what I've experienced is that when you take the time to really get to know you, we were talking about before the podcast, really like how your body operates, then you really begin to take a little bit more control of your life. And if you have a little bit more control over, oh gosh, okay, I can feel this percolating, I'm about to get angry, then you've got a little bit more control over things. And really, that's what I would hope, from an emotional intelligence standpoint, that you would begin to learn about yourself by really beginning to journal and write this stuff down.
I'm so glad you said that, Mike. Journaling is very powerful. First of all, nobody has to see it. It's for your eyes only. When you talk about collecting data, when you journal over a period of time, you start to notice patterns in your behavior. You start to notice patterns in your emotional reactions. You start to identify what your triggers are. Knowing that stuff is important, especially in the work environment. And, people always ask me, well, what do I do with the triggers? Well, guess what? Just knowing what they are is most of the battle. So for instance, if you grew up in a home, if you grew up in a home where your father was always yelling at you, okay, there's a good chance when someone is elevated in their tone or their volume, you're going to be triggered. You're going to be checked out. You're going to go into defense mode. You're going to stop listening. The wall's going to go up. But if you can take a moment and connect that to past experiences, then when you are triggered in the workplace, you can then talk to yourself, which, by the way, we all do. We all have that voice, right? To say to yourself, take a deep breath.
I'm not going to talk about it.
This is not my father, right? I'm not going to project. And I'm just going to allow space for this person to speak, right? And it's about making those connections. And I think journaling is a great way to do that.
It is, because what you're talking about is those little things, that seep into our unconscious. Like, somebody may say, well, yeah, my father used to yell a lot and he had a temper. And listen, there is no way that didn't have some kind of effect on you. And that may be conscious or that may be unconscious. And most of the time, what I found just in my conversation with guys is that it's that unconscious thing. It just it simmered inside of you. It's inside of you. And usually like clockwork, those negative things seem to come out at the most inopportune times. It's incredible how that works. And it usually in our adult life seeps into the relationships.
But here's the good news. We don't have to do any of this perfect.
Oh yeah.
You know what I mean? We can make
Right.
mistakes. We can have sometimes the wrong impact. But here's the deal. It's what we do when we make those mistakes. It's what we do when we have those missteps. It's not about being perfect. It's about what we do when we become imperfect.
Mm.
And it's about reading the room. It's about seeing how your audience is responding to you. And it's about reflecting and figuring out, you know, is there a part that I'm playing in this, and what do I need to do to improve? And I find the older we get, the more set in our ways we get. I don't want to generalize.
It is
But
true,
you
but
know,
even that requires a lot of awareness.
it's an ongoing journey.
Yeah.
And listen, first time in US history, we have 5 generations in the
Hmm.
workplace. All right.
How crazy is
And
that?
it's crazy. And there's a
Yeah.
lot of differences that each
Hmm.
generation brings. They bring strengths. They bring areas. I'm not calling it weakness, but areas of opportunity. There isn't a day that goes by that I don't hear a boomer complaining about a millennial or a Gen Zer. They're lazy. They don't want to work hard. They
Yeah.
want it handed to them. But they do also bring a lot of good to the workplace as well. And I think it requires the older generations, our generations and more mature and older, to reflect. We might have to change our approach a little bit. And I can tell you the younger
Yeah.
generation appreciates authenticity. They appreciate respect. So for a leader in their 50s and 60s to say, you know what, I got to say to you, I know I didn't speak to you in the most appropriate way the other day, you know, and I know that my intentions were to motivate you, but I have a feeling I had the wrong impact. And I just want you to know I acknowledge that. That is a very powerful
Yeah.
exchange, especially when you are saying that to a younger person. And that is I think the secret sauce to retaining the younger generation. They care tremendously about respect, trust,
Yeah.
workplace culture, workplace experience, integrity. So the good news, you don't have to do it perfect, but take those opportunities where we have those missteps as an opportunity to show your integrity, to demonstrate your emotional intelligence, because that goes a long way with people.
Yeah. And in some of the groups that I run around with, we toss around the term sage quite a bit. And so, sage might be, and if I had to put a number on it, a sage is a guy maybe in his 60s and above that has that life experience that you
Mm,
can turn to. And I always like to use the term maybe shortcut
yeah.
some years off your life by leaning on their experience. And what I have found with this younger generation is they love that idea. They love the idea that if an I don't say older person because
More mature.
I think I'm
Yeah.
leaning the wrong direction here. But if somebody that's lived a little can be there to offer them some advice, maybe mentor them. What I'm
Sure.
finding more and more is that a lot of these young people, they like that. They like that. And maybe they've never even had that in their life. And they don't necessarily even know what to call it, but they like that guidance. And you can step in and fill a void for a lot of people. Now, you know,
Yeah.
because one of the challenges we have in this country is that there's just been a lot of fatherlessness go on.
Mm,
Maybe not a male role model, maybe not a father present. And so, for men, maybe they've never been exposed to a good man. And both, and when I say,
mm,
man on man, this goes for women too, because I mean, we've all seen the same thing,
sure.
throughout this country. And so having the guidance of somebody that's been there is really critically important. And, I don't know that we do a good enough job in this country recognizing that,
Yeah.
because a lot of times we elevate people. It's kind of that American Idol syndrome is what I
Right.
call it. It's
Right.
like, oh, there's the 16-year-old artist, and it's
Sure.
like, the value of somebody that's lived a little sometimes gets passed over. But I
Yeah.
think we can't underestimate having lived a little can help some of our people in our younger generation.
I agree with you. I think mentoring is a very wonderful, powerful tool that companies can use to show support to raise up new talent. There's a new phenomenon, a new tool that companies are using called reverse mentoring. I think is also equally as effective,
Mm,
giving the younger generation an opportunity to teach the more mature generations a thing or two. And they do bring a
yeah.
lot of value when it comes to technology, efficiencies,
Yeah.
new ideas on how to improve processes using newer technology. I think I agree with you. I think the more mature generations certainly have so much to bring to the younger generation, but I also think there's an opportunity for the more mature generation to learn from the younger generation
Yeah.
too.
I,
So it does go both ways, you
I
know.
agree. Please send somebody over to run my social media.
They're great. They're
No.
great, you know. And listen, they also have a lot of wonderful ideas. And
Yeah.
one of the things that I hear a lot in my clients is, a lot of the more mature generations shut down these ideas. Well, we've always done it this
Yeah.
way. Or
Yeah.
how about I created that process and I'm not changing it. But, and listen, do we have to honor every idea that's been presented? No. But it's an opportunity to say, thank you so much for using your brain, your critical thinking, your problem solving. What a wonderful idea. Don't know if I'm going to be able to deliver on
Yeah.
that, but I just love the energy and the enthusiasm that you're bringing. Folks, that's what we want in our employees. We want people to be using their heads.
Yeah, and I'll tell you
Yeah.
what, I cringe when somebody says, "Well, we've always done it this way."
Yeah.
Like, and I have to say, I'm not a technology guy. I don't fully understand it. Sometimes I don't even fully embrace it. But technology really is a game changer in a lot of things that we do. And I think that, one of the horrible mistakes that many business people and some entrepreneurs can make is saying, well, I think this way works, because you're going to get run over if you think that way, because
Yeah.
there's, the technology, whether you like it or not, is just changing so many things. And, sometimes that's a good thing. Sometimes that's a good thing. Now, interpersonal relationships, I don't know that they're any different than they ever have
Well,
been.
it's funny you say that. I saw something recently on YouTube. The rate of technology has changing. Literally, it's like this.
Yeah.
Like every day there's something new. ChatGPT, Quillbot,
Yeah.
all these
Yeah. Yeah.
applications, AI.
AI.
I mean, it is such a rapid growth, but
Yeah.
yet interpersonally and on a human level, we are stagnant.
Yeah.
Technology hasn't made us smarter. It's made us more efficient, for
Yeah.
sure. Right? Perfect example is this podcast. Back in the day, we would have had to met in a studio.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. Yeah.
So I'm in my home office and you're in, so there's a lot of value to that, but we're not getting more intelligent. And I don't think technology necessarily equates to better relationships.
No, I always laugh about this because it was right around 2000, which, we're talking about 23 years ago. And I was with a company, a telecommunications company, and they brought in a speaker. Now, keep in mind, I just said 23 years ago,
23
really
years
not all
ago.
that long ago.
Right.
But this guy had the audacity in 2000 to write a book called High Tech, High Touch. Now think about that. 23 years later, how much more technology do we have? And 23 years ago, this guy, and he may have written it, more than 23 years ago, comes out with a book called High Tech, High Touch. He'd already recognized that technology we were somehow going to lose interpersonal skills. And what I'm finding is it seems like that's more and more true all the time. Something as simple as, one of my first jobs was working in the grocery store, and how I was taught in the grocery store was have a discussion with the people that are right there in front of you. Imagine that. Now, how many times do you go into the grocery store nowadays and never say a word to the person checking you out?
How about the fact that I do self-checkout? So there's
then there's that. Yeah. So but that is a good point. We have lost so much interaction. Just the ability to have a friendly conversation. I mean, when I grew up playing Little League ball, all the parents sat in the stands. They had to talk to each other. Why? they couldn't bury themselves in their mobile phone. Go to a game now, everybody's buried in their mobile phone and basically peeking over their shoulder going, I hope I don't have to have a conversation with those parents because I don't know about them. You know what I mean?
No. One of the most common requests I get for training programs is communication and conflict resolution.
Yeah.
And every single time we talk about when to pick up the phone. When is it time to pick up the phone, or better yet, have a face-to-face meeting? I think we all are guilty of hiding behind email and digital communications. It is definitely very efficient.
Yeah.
But the problem with electronic communication, texting, emailing, is you cannot always decipher the tone of the sender. So the receiver gets an email, the receiver gets a tone, and subconsciously we go through a slew of things in our brain.
For sure.
What is this person saying? What is the mood behind the words? I mean, the words can sound great, but if there's too many caps or too many exclamation points, or you forgot to say good morning as a greeting, it can throw off the entire message of an email.
Yeah.
And so, there's a lot of value there to knowing when to pick up the phone. And it's at the phone is when you can hear tone.
Yeah.
You can hear the words, so you have more information. Face-to-face is even better because face-to-face, now you can read body language, which is the biggest mode of our communication. I could lie out of my mouth to you, but my body language never lies. In fact, our body language makes up 55% of what we communicate. It's not the words, it's not the tone, it's the body language. And the body language is controlled by our subconscious brain. So it's actually how we really feel about things. So if you're trying to resolve an issue, if you're trying to rectify something over email, gone back and forth 2, 3, 4, 5 times, pick up the phone, or better yet, have a face-to-face. You're going to get a lot more data. Yeah. You're going to get a lot more information, and then you'll be able to better navigate through it. So I think in this modern day, we've got all these different applications, all these different technologies, all these different ways of communicating, but they're not all created equal, and they're not all best for the situation that you're in. You got to ask yourself, what's the best mode of communication for what I need to deal with right now? Maybe it's hop on a Zoom call so you can see, you can hear, and texting, probably the worst form of all the communications.
It is. Yeah.
You want to escalate something quickly, talk about it over text. There's a lot of room for error.
Yeah.
Texting should be considered a brief conversation. Can you pick milk on the way up from work, home from work? Honey, can you make sure to get gas in the car when you get home? Simple requests, but no emotionally based conversations. Right? If you think there's going to be a disagreement, texting is the worst.
I agree. And also Facebook Messenger, which I hate. That's just like texting. And so I got a message from somebody yesterday and I'm like, I'm not responding. I had to laugh when you're talking about
no response is still a response. I always tell my clients.
I'll just say the tone to that one was didn't require.
Perhaps that's the response you wanted them to have. No response is still a response. But go ahead. My apologies.
I was just going to say, it's funny because we have all these little subtle signs that I actually was on a podcast with a guy that talked about the idea of the body language and all that. And that was kind of intimidating. I'm not going to lie. So I'm like, is he reading me right now? But I actually do. It's funny. I have far more phone calls now on video platform than I do my phone. And in fact, a lot of times I find anymore, I don't like phone calls because I feel like I'm missing.
You're driving blind.
That person. Yeah.
I mean, like right now you're speaking. I'm nodding my head. You see that.
Right.
You would miss that if it was just a phone call. You wouldn't know if I was engaged.
Yeah.
Speaking.
It's amazing. If you'd have said to me prior to COVID starting, well, you're going to spend all this time on all these Zoom calls. I mean, granted, my whole business idea was completely different back then, but I would have said, you're crazy. And honestly, the truth be told, I had to figure out how to use Zoom like a lot of people early on.
Right.
In fact, I hopped on a call with somebody once and he said, I think he said, share your screen. And I went, I don't know how to do that. He said, you better figure it out.
Here you go.
You better figure it out. And,
Yeah.
sure enough, I had to figure it out, but,
Yeah.
that's the way it goes. And, if there's one thing that's come out of COVID, it's these types of formats where we're able to do a podcast. I'm going to stick this podcast out on Voice so somebody could listen to it driving down the road, or you can go out on YouTube, or you can watch it. And to me, that's incredible because
it's wonderful.
Yeah, there's so much valuable information that gets passed back and forth in this format, and I just absolutely love it. So, Taryn, before we wrap up today, we could probably keep going all day long, I'm sure. Tell everybody, how can they get a hold of you? We will, of course, put this information in the show notes. If you'd like to learn more, if you're running a business and you want an expert like Taryn, or if you're looking for some coaching because you're like going, man, my interpersonal skills are like off the charts low or something, tell everybody how they can get a hold of you.
Sure. So the easiest way is to just take my name and just put it into LinkedIn and I will pop right up.
There you go.
The other way to reach me is to email me directly at info at empowerbehavioralservices.com. Or you can reach me directly at 973-803-8276. Anyone that is interested in working individually, especially, certainly training, but mostly coaching. If you find you've been struggling with a lot of the change, if you find you are burnt out, those are really great opportunities to invest in yourself and self-lead. And what better investment than to invest in coaching? I work with a lot of men, so I think there's huge opportunity there, and would love to hear from you.
There you go. Well, thank you, Taryn, for being on the show today. Greatly appreciate it.
Thank you for inviting me.
You bet. Take care.
Take care.